One of the policymakers that we have with us today, who is the keynote today, is Richard Whitman. And Richard is a senior policy advisor for Governor Kitzhaber, and we're pleased and honored that he could take time out of his busy schedule. Legislature is still in session after all, and he has a few things on his plate. He's here for the keynote. He's not going to be able to stay because he has to get back to Salem and meet with the governor and get the legislature done with their work. Just a brief background on Richard. He was appointed permanently to his position in January of this year after being appointed interim in January of 2011. And I would have loved to have been the fly on the wall in that conversation in terms of who twisted whose arm to get him to stay as a natural policy advisor or natural resources advisor. Prior to that, Richard was the director of the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development, and he was doing that since 2008. And don't anybody in this room think that our land use policies are not one of the reasons why we have such a strong forestry base here in this state. And so he's been at it for a while. He has a long history in natural resources, also serving as the attorney in charge in the Natural Resources section of the Oregon Department of Justice. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from Tufts, a Master's in City Planning, and I'm not quite sure, Richard, how that translates to natural resources, but that's probably a conversation for another time. But that's from MIT, and then a Doctor of Jurisprudence from the UC Berkeley. Please welcome Richard Whitman.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to see so many of you survived the Reeser parking lot pay machine. It's great that you all made it in here this morning. It's a real pleasure for me to be here, at least briefly, and escape from the goings-on in Salem. But before I get into my main remarks, I do want to really acknowledge the great work that OFRI, Paul and the OFRI board have done over the last several years. I spent some time last night looking at some of the OFRI reports, and every time I go and look at reports from OFRI, I'm just amazed at the very high quality of the work that you do. So thank you for your ongoing work. It's top notch. I also want to recognize Hal Salwasser. Paul mentioned Hal, but Hal is retiring after many years this year, and just very pleased to have had some opportunity to work with him, and hope we still have some opportunities to work together in the future. And very glad that he could be here today. So I have escaped briefly from Salem, and we have had some difficult politics in this last legislative session in 2012, a little bit unlike the rosy session that we had in 2011. But I'm not here today to dwell on the difficult politics of Salem. Frankly, that's not the most important thing in terms of our forest industry in Oregon. What is important, and what I want to stress today and make sure that you understand, is that the state is fully committed to the role of forestry and forest products as key industries in Oregon's economic future. Oregon remains and will continue to be the best place in the United States to grow and process timber. For our private forest, the main challenge facing us is the continued depression in the U.S. housing market. And finally, just in these past couple of months, we were starting to see some definite signs of rebound in the housing market, with housing starts projected to rise this year from the very low level that they've been at of 500,000 up to 700,000 this year and 850,000 in 2013. We still have a long way to go to get back to where we want to be in terms of our housing market, but I think we finally turned the corner and very pleased to see things headed in the right direction. Longer term, I know many of you are here today because you're concerned about increasing regulatory restrictions on private timberlands in particular. And one of the things you're going to hear about is litigation over the forest roads issue later today. I think you all know that Oregon is a defendant in that lawsuit, and Oregon has joined with the other industry defendants in challenging the decision from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that runoff from forest roads require a permit under the Clean Water Act. We remain optimistic that the U.S. Supreme Court will review that decision. And in the event that the Supreme Court does not review the decision, we're committed to working with industry and other partners to make sure that we have a workable general permit system to deal with the Ninth Circuit opinion, and to continue to work with federal agencies and, if necessary, Congress to develop a lasting, stable solution to that situation. More broadly on water quality, we're all facing the challenge of continuing to make progress in improving our state and our nation's water quality for us and for our children. And later today, you're going to hear from another panel, including the director of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, about Oregon's water temperature standards. Last night, I reviewed the most recent data from Oregon DEQ on trends in water quality in the state of Oregon. And the long and the short of it is that while water quality is improving in some parts of the state, there are other parts of the state where the trend is in the opposite direction, and we actually have water quality that is deteriorating. And that's a troubling trend to see. And two particular areas where the trend is in the wrong direction and that are of particular concern are on the north coast of Oregon and also down in the Klamath Basin. So what are we going to do about some of those issues? Well, I want to reassure you that Oregon is not interested in being punitive with landowners or coming after people and shutting them down. We do, however, have a responsibility to our citizens, to our local governments who have invested hundreds of millions of dollars, to industry members who have done the right thing and who have been good stewards of water quality, to identify where those problems are coming from and to start to make more strategic efforts to make things go in the right direction. And toward that end, we are using the total maximum daily load process that you're going to hear about a little bit more later today to identify where the problems are coming from in particular parts of the state and where improvements are needed both on point source and non-point source water quality controls to move us in the right direction. For agriculture, this means working really in the next phase of Oregon's groundbreaking 1010 program and improving our ability to monitor and evaluate where we're making progress and where we're not. It does not mean a new enforcement strategy. It means becoming more strategic in working with property owners to help them do the right thing and make the changes necessary to improve water quality. For forestry, the work the Board of Forestry has initiated to look at the adequacy of our current Forest Practice Act riparian regulations with regard to water temperature is going to play an important role. Within the framework set by existing state legislation for any changes to Forest Practice Act regulations. Oregon Department of Forestry is also working in partnership with Oregon Department of Environmental Quality on a new total maximum daily load for the mid-coast area of the state, and that's going to be an important sort of trial effort to work with both forestry and agriculture and other sources of water pollution to make sure that, again, we're being strategic and moving things in the right direction. That effort is kicking off with a joint meeting of the Oregon Board of Forestry and the Oregon Environmental Quality Commission in the Mid-Coast later this spring. So collectively, these efforts that Oregon is taking represent a reasoned, careful, scientific approach to addressing water quality challenges in Oregon, to reassure our citizens that we are all collectively moving in the direction of cleaner water for us, for our children, and for our grandchildren. But the main challenge really for Oregon in terms of forestry is not so much on our private forest or even on our state forest. I think, as you all know, the main challenge for forestry in Oregon is really with regard to our federal forest lands. I won't repeat for you the litany of issues resulting from a lack of active management on federal forest lands, both on the east side and on the west side. Those are well documented already in reports, including reports from the Oregon Forest Cluster and the Federal Forest Advisory Committee. I do want to talk about two significant initiatives that the Governor Kitzhaber, is committed to with regard to federal forest. First, with regard to East Side Forest in particular, the governor is committed to working with the Federal Forest Advisory Committee Implementation Working Group and other partners to build a lasting infrastructure to support large-scale forest collaborative projects in eastern and southern Oregon. We've committed funding in this biennium to begin and continue this work to support collaboratives, and we are continuing discussions with the Forest Service on how to scale those efforts up and get more volume out of our dry forest. This initiative is very much in line with Oregon Business Plan and Forest Cluster strategies developed during the last couple of years of the Kulongoski administration. The other even more daunting challenge in terms of federal forest is with regard to the ONC forest lands in western and southern Oregon. As you all know, the challenge there is in terms of lack of jobs, lack of timber for mills, as well now as the lack of revenue for the ONC counties as a result of the ending of the federal Secure Rural Schools payments to counties that you've all read about in the papers recently. The governor has been working quietly with Oregon's congressional delegation on the federal legislation, the bipartisan federal legislation that you saw introduced by Congressman DeFazio, Congressman Walden, and Congressman Schrader recently. He convened the delegation back in D.C. in October, both to talk about that legislative effort and to talk with the senators about an extension of the Secure Rural Schools program, and that work is still underway on the Senate side back in D.C. The governor has not taken a specific position on the bipartisan legislative proposal coming out of the House part of the Oregon delegation. And he's not done that because he believes he can be most effective, most helpful in moving forward and getting a resolution on ONC by helping to broaden the collaborative base of interests supporting that legislation. Exactly what form that takes in terms of the governor's role is in active development right now, and I expect you'll be hearing more from the governor on that issue in the next month. In the very near term, we do expect in my office to bring a federal forest policy advisor on board who will work with the Department of Forestry, the Board of Forestry, Oregon's congressional delegation, and other partners to advance work particularly on the ONC lands. Finally, one other aspect of the challenge with regard to ONC that you're going to not necessarily hear about in this room today, but you are going to hear about today. I think many in the room know that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is set to announce the draft critical habitat designations for northern spotted owl later today. That pair up with the recovery plan that they released last year. The governor has been in some discussion with both the Secretary of the Interior and actually this morning with the White House. And the White House is committed that there will be a full economic analysis of the projected economic impacts of both the recovery plan and the critical habitat designation. So we look forward to working with the administration on those issues. They are part of the issue with the ONC lands and are going to need to be dealt with as part of resolving those difficult issues. I want to leave you with just a short reminder. This is Governor Kitzhaber's third term, but some of you may have forgotten from his first 2 terms a little bit about his philosophy on natural resource issues. You need to remember, and you'll see this manifested over the next couple of years, that this governor is about collaboration, not about conflict, not about courts as a way of deciding natural resource disputes. The governor's interested in lasting solutions to natural resource conflicts. He doesn't view the state's role as deciding between competing interests. Rather, he's going to push those competing interests to get in a room together and work out solutions on their own to natural resource issues. That sort of approach is not easy. It's not the easy road to take in resolving these conflicts, but it is the way to get to lasting results. So I look forward to, in that line, working with many of you in this room over the next couple of years to tackle some of the challenges that I've just outlined. And again, I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak here to you all, and wish that I could stay and hear the great program that you've got, but I need to head back to Salem. So again, thank you very much. Thanks.